my kind of body image was something I struggled with. But I actually got a full-blown eating disorder when I was around, I think it was around 15.
Wow, so that's quite young.
Yeah. And kind of starving and purging, anorexia and bulimia became a big part of my life and my identity, I would say, until just before I got married when I was 20. I also did self-harm at times. I wouldn't say drastically. And this was in the days when self-harm was not trendy, right? Because, nobody kind of knew about it. It was just a way that I found to get relief from the pain.
What do you do when the person you love most is struggling and you're not even aware of it yet? In today's episode, we're going to talk about invisible pain, pressures on relationships, and what you can do to help someone who is struggling without fixing them. Brian and Terry, welcome. Thank you for joining Between the Lines.
Thanks for having us.
We're going to have loads to talk about because sitting in front of Brian and Shul, I know that after Shul, there's always lots to talk about in the mental health sphere. But I think maybe we should to give everyone a picture. If we just start off, I guess, with you, Terry, to talk about sort of a bit about your upbringing, and we'll get into marriage and we'll talk about all the things.
So, okay, you want me to give my full story?
A full synopsis.
Oh,
yes.
full story. Okay, you stop me at any time. So I was brought up in Johannesburg in South Africa. And I would say, if we're focusing on me, that I was a little girl and grew into a teenager who wanted to, I sometimes use the phrase, be the best little girl in the world. When I was 10, I read a book called The Best Little Girl in the World. And it was about this little girl who actually became anorexic. She had an eating disorder, which was not trending in the kind of late 70s, 80s when I was young. And I grew up feeling like the world had a lot of power and I had little. And the way that I could readdress that balance was if I could perfect my world, if I could be cleverer and prettier and more popular. Then I would feel more worthy inside, or I could feel more okay about myself. And as we all know, that takes a lot of mental effort. And all that kind of mental effort led me to being someone that lived on and off with quite a lot of anxiety and quite a lot of kind of self-inflicted pressure. But saying that, the environment that I grew up in was a very competitive one. And my parents just kind of innocently went along with that. I was at very competitive schools. And so as I grew up, I obviously couldn't always be the prettiest and the most popular, and that obviously led to disappointment. When I was in my teens, my way of coping with a lot of my feelings of disappointment and anxiety, we always found strategies to deal with that. I developed an eating disorder. I kind of felt that if I could control my food, and I'd always struggled with weight as a little girl. And in fact, when I was 5 years old, my parents, bless them, was a different age and generation, put me on a diet. I went to Weight Watchers, I think, when I was about 7. I was secretly binging when I was 9. So it was always my kind of body image was something I struggled with. But I actually got a full-blown eating disorder when I was around, I think it was around 15.
Wow, so that's quite young.
Yeah. And kind of starving and purging, anorexia and bulimia became a big part of my life and my identity, I would say, until just before I got married when I was 20. I also did self-harm at times. I wouldn't say drastically. And this was in the days when self-harm was not trendy, right? Because, nobody kind of knew about it. It was just a way that I found to get relief from the pain. So when I was 19, I actually became a balistriver, and I landed up in a VA. I came back. I met Brian. I got married to him. He was the first person I dated. And just before that, I had stopped having my periods, and I wanted to have children. And I actually shifted my priorities in my mind. It was where the kind of insight happened for me that I had a choice between either, in my mind, having children or being committed to being so thin. And I chose children. So it was the beginning, just the very beginning of my healing journey.
Wow. Well, because you knew it was either one or the other.
I knew that I needed to be healthy enough to be able to have children, and my body wasn't. My body was telling me that I wasn't. Yeah. So we got married, and we actually left South Africa very quickly, and we went to live in Israel. We lived in Israel for 4 years.
Can I just ask, Brian, when you got married, when you were standing under the chuppah, were you aware about Terry's struggles?
Yeah, we were very open in the dating process. I will remain unnamed rabbi, but somebody I'm still very close to and very respect very deeply, so was skeptical for me because I had my own story, which I'm happy to share, but it wasn't as full of this kind of fluctuations emotionally, psychologically, physically. And he sort of, looked at me, you're a half decent kind of bacher. And so there was some concerns but I was already too interested. So, no, but because I have to disagree already with something. We'll disagree many times over the course of this discussion, but I don't agree that she says she wasn't the prettiest. So, couldn't let that go. Yeah. So you can score points in any environment, right?
Yeah, you've already started very well, Brian. Yeah. So was it more heart than mind, like?
No, it was both. No, I thought it through, and I thought this was a spectacular person. That the fact that Terry had some things she had struggled with and was still struggling with, and we were very open about that. And I also had my stuff in my past and background didn't deter me.
Even though there could have been a possibility that you wouldn't have been able to have children. Because you didn't know that Terry was going to make that decision.
I don't think that really came up for us. Yeah. I think that we were already, you were past that point.
I was past that by the time I met Brian.
Yeah, that wasn't an issue.
Yeah.
Okay, so then you got married, you moved to Israel.
Yeah, Brian came from a family where they moved around a lot. So he was very comfortable with change. I wasn't, right? Mm-hmm. There were a whole bunch of conditions that I needed in my world in order to feel safe and secure. I've kind of already said some of them, right? But a big one was also just the routine of life. I'd lived in one house my whole life until I married Brian.
I'd lived in 11. And on 3 continents.
So welcome.
Right. Talk about opposites attract. By the time I was 12, I'd lived on 3 continents.
We were so opposite. So Brian took me, we went from South Africa, we went to Israel for 4 years, then we went to London, then we went back to Israel, then we went back to London, we moved house, and I was not at this stage.
And these weren't business, we were living a Kayla lifestyle, and then I was working in Kiriv in the early days, so...
Yeah,
what was motivating it was not, sort of financial opportunity in those changes.
Yeah. And during that time, we had 5 boys within 7 years, very quickly. I, as you probably might have picked up, and I could tell you more stories, but maybe we'll save those for another time, was quite an extreme personality at this stage of my life and quite impulsive. But I had such a love of children. I always say that I only married Brian so I could have children. Mm-hmm. And so I just had them one after the other.
Never thought of myself like that, but
he was useful. He was useful. We came to like him too, but yeah. But the thing with our kids, just to say which was an important part of the story, is that every single one of our kids almost in quite a unique way screamed and was uncomfortable for almost the first 2 years of their lives. So the first 20 months, we went for everything, for cranial osteopathy and changed my diet and breastfeeding and not breastfeeding and everything you could think of. No. And these little boys did not sleep. We never could put them in a car seat or a pram or a cot. And so it was 24/7 holding them.
Some kind of digestive disorder that we could never get to the bottom of.
All the kids, all the 5 kids
Every single one, without exception. We even had a 9-year gap and then had a last one to see if our genes had forgotten, and it was the exact same.
So that's a lot for anyone. 5 kids in 7 years.
Yeah.
Did you feel that you were what made you feel that you were ready for that, or you just decided?
No, I'm saying we didn't So what made, when Yaakov says what made you feel ready? Nothing. We weren't
so intentional as we later became about our life decisions. So we were just going more with our instinct. And as I said, I loved kids. I was crazy about them. There was nothing more I wanted to be than a mother. And so I just, as I do with most things in life, I just threw myself into it.
And also it was boys only, so. There was
So what, we're waiting for a goal.
Yeah. We never
Yeah.
solved that particular crack that nut, you know.
We said you can't solve everything.
Baruch Hashem, we're now zeichet to several granddaughters, so we
And
got there
daughters-in-law.
eventually.
And beautiful daughters-in-law.
Beautiful
Yeah.
daughter-in-law, so we got there. Yeah.
So maybe we can go to the point in our lives where I was 29 years old. We were living in London, and it was the second time we've come to live in London. And I just had my 5th child, and the last 2 were literally a year apart. So the second last one was still screaming and unhappy, and so was this one. And I was very overwhelmed.
And also just to stress here that because we're living in London, we didn't have family here. Our support system was quite limited. We were working in Kirov, so we were the support for a lot of people in different ways. So there was a lot of factors that were compounding and that made that. Yeah.
And I remember it was actually the day after Purim, and I'd been going through a depression. I'd been really depressed since my youngest had been born. I was anxious. It was 2 screaming babies. It was very, very overwhelming. And I call it the Great Depression because I feel like I'd been depressed at times in my life, but it'd been more like almost a flirtatious kind of, experience. But this just seemed to be setting in, and I didn't know how to get out of it. I was on not major medication. I was on a light dose of, I'm very sensitive to medication, of fluoxetine, Prozac. And I was going to a therapist. Nothing seemed to be helping. And we held a Purim party for like 80 people that night. And it was an amazing event. I actually felt very distracted at it and enjoyed it. But the next morning I plummeted. And and all the kids were home the day after Purim.
And I was at work.
Yeah. And it was kind of my lowest moment, right? I just like hit this rock bottom moment. Like everything imploded for me in that moment. And I landed up having to go to hospital. Maybe you want to say how that was for you, or you want me to keep on going?
Did you see that coming, Brian, or did Terry keep it more inside when she was?
So I knew she was struggling, but I think there's 2 significant points. One is that I didn't have a real insight into that struggle. I saw it externally, obviously, and she would keep it. She didn't keep it inside, and there'd been some incidents. I think, if I recall, there was maybe a bit of self-harm at that point. But that particular moment and that inflection moment where things, as Terry said, really plummeted, that did completely catch me out. Like I said, we had this big Purim Suda, hosted lots of people, were doing Kirov entertaining, and the next thing I went off to work the next morning, and so that had I seen that coming, I wouldn't have done that. I wasn't that irresponsible.
Yeah.
So it did catch me.
So I'm just like thinking about it. Like, you've got the 5 kids, you're trying to keep the Kirov going and put on a smile and do what you need to do. Terry has to go to hospital. Like, how do you keep everything going?
Well, first of all, I wanted to say this was what was difficult at the time, is that nobody knew that I was depressed. I was a very high-functioning depressive. So I still cooked, and I did the washing, and I looked after the kids, and I taught, I did everything.
It was an amazing mother.
Yeah.
Did you put on a smile? Did you want to show everyone that everything was fine?
I didn't know how not to be a high achiever. I didn't know how to not function at 100%. It was almost my script in a way. So it was almost, I went internal with my pain a lot. I didn't know how to express it, how to ask for the right help, how to manage it, how to relate to my feelings. And so I just went internal and almost carried on with life. So that's why I think that when I did something so extreme, because the pain felt so overwhelming, it was probably quite shocking or surprised to Brian.
And to other members of the family. But I think that's a very important point, because there's a nuance here. This idea of being a high-functioning depressive is interesting, because Terry she was functioning in life still. The home was running brilliantly. She was doing a great job as a mother. As you were saying, she was entertaining, but she was suffering inside. I subsequently learned a term many years later, silent suffering. So there was silent suffering going on. And it wasn't, so I don't think yes, there was a dimension of putting on a smile, but it was also, as you say, it was the way you functioned and the way and so there were 2 sides of you, a side that was highly functional and achieving a lot, and another side that was suffering deeply inside.
And was that suffering, was it like, was it a darkness? Was it, what type of feelings was
I
it?
think I lived with a lot of dread, a lot of fear, and I couldn't even articulate or understand what that was about. I can now, but I didn't know then. I also I just felt I was an overthinker, an overanalyzer. And because I went internal and overanalyzed, you've got to feel all that thinking. And I was doing a lot of thinking. So I lived with a lot of heavy feelings. I felt that I could make sense of life from this very low state of mind, which of course you can't. So when you look out into life, everything looks like a problem. I looked like a problem. The country I was living in looked like a problem. You know, Brian at times looked like a problem. Everything did. So everything felt a bit helpless, and I didn't know how to change things. I didn't feel supported in London. I wasn't happy. I hadn't found myself in London, and I didn't quite know how to change any of that. And obviously, when you're struggling that much, you feel I was disconnected from Hashem, from God. I mean, and the reason that I came to From Kat was a very real, I'm quite a feelingful spiritual person. So it was a very alive, real connection. I couldn't feel that. That was dead. So my relationship to Yiddishkeit felt very heavy. And I couldn't find meaning in that either. I didn't have a career. I was a person who did very well at school. I had a lot of aspirations for myself.
Scholarship to university.
Got a scholarship to university. But here I found myself with all these kids stuck in this very domestic life, which I had loved in the beginning, but after year on year on year and not having a support system or many friends, it was now becoming quite mundane, a lot of drudgery, and I didn't know how to shift that or change that. I didn't think I could go to university or I could study.
So you're almost like a bit trapped.
I felt trapped, very much. I felt trapped, yeah. Yeah.
And your day-to-day was obviously chaotic because you've got the kids who would, weren't the easiest, and probably by that time some older boisterous boys.
I have to say one thing. My boys were amazing. I had really good kids. I felt the mothering role I knew how to do. I knew how to put boundaries and love them and keep them occupied. I was creative, and they were amazing. Like, especially my older boys were very calm. They were readers. They were quite compliant. They got a little naughtier when they got little. And then I was like, hey, what are these people? Who are they? But the kids were amazing. I think that was a very helpful piece. I didn't ever feel like overwhelmed or that they were the problem. They were always the kind of light that kept me going.
Our children are sponsoring this podcast, right? Just checking.
They were. I feel like Hashem really, sometimes he gives you like some refuahs before the Makkah. Like that was one of mine, were these amazing boys, yeah. So
so how old was when you were feeling like that? So what was he would have been, the oldest would have been 5 when you went into hospital?
No, he was 7.
Almost 7.
Almost 7. Almost 7. Yeah. Almost 7.
So 7. Yeah, 7.
Yeah.
So Brian, did you tell them about it at the time, or did you try to sort of just, they must have asked where's mummy?
Yeah, I think we managed. I can't remember.
We said mummy's not feeling well, physically. They thought it was physical,
I think a remarkable thing is that somehow we didn't make over dramatize it. We managed our way through it, and the kids, it never came up. It never was an issue. Like, they managed, they were robust and resilient, and I guess I was, and the family was.
Brian is an amazing, amazing father. I'm saying on those times where because often at the end of the day when he'd come home, I couldn't do it anymore. Most wives can't at that stage, but I was not doing well.
Yeah.
And I would just almost I need to go to my room at that stage, and Brian could step in. And Brian's got a very upbeat personality. He likes to dance and sing around the house, and so there was a lot of joy. And he's always been a very involved active father. That was a huge
you knew
thing.
That Terry needed. Did you say to Brian this is too much for me? Can you step in? Or you knew intuitively?
It was both. It was obvious. Yeah, it was practically obvious, and Terry would retreat if she needed to a room, bedroom, or whatever. So yeah, it was didn't need to be a rocket scientist to work it out.
But at that time, if Terry's, let's say, self-harming in hospital, you wouldn't have known that Terry was going to be sitting here, and doing all the amazing things, which we'll talk about. But at that time, was there fear and what's going to be with the future with the kids?
Sure there was. I think that there was one night, we've talked about this before, and it was probably the only moment I ever had, with her in the hospital, and she wasn't fully conscious. And I think it was the only time I ever experienced any kind of doubt in our marriage. And it was momentary. It caught me off guard because And because there was a moment of overwhelming fear. Can I do this? And then fortunately it passed. And I said, yeah, I can do this. We can do this. And that was a critical moment to be 100% clear on that and just go forward. You love a person, and you love them unconditionally, and you're committed to the relationship, and you're committed to the family, no matter what. And that just, I don't feel like I had to work on that. Just
that was your obligation.
That was intuitive to me.
Mm-hmm.
That just felt. That's what, I don't even think of it as obligation. It was just a natural place I needed to be in the world at that moment. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu had put me in that matzav with these people and this family right now and this lady, and it was just perfect. We would make it perfect. We'd work it through and make it work.
I do want to say that Brian has always, from the beginning of our marriage, in a way that I've really admired and sometimes been envious of, had the most unconditional kind of love for me, which I grew to understand was part of why he truly was my zivug, because I didn't have that for myself. I needed such a strong presence of it in my marriage to hold a mirror to myself. You know, he saw me at my absolute worst, and I could literally see that his love didn't falter. And that was so confusing to me, because I'd had other people in my life, which was part of my struggles, who were hypercritical of me growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And so seeing this person who'd see like the worst versions of me and still was so unconditional was just a machaya to me. It like baffled me. And it was exactly what I needed. It was part of my healing process. Yeah.
So in a way, that's sort of unspoken. Like you didn't need to necessarily tell Terry that you're there unconditionally. It was the feeling. I mean, you can see why you got that feeling because of what Brian's saying now. But he just thought it's
I probably did.
He's quite expressive.
Yeah, probably did speak it up, but I don't. Yeah, but it was not really necessary, you know.
Yeah.
And
I never felt judged or.
I didn't always.
Sorry.
I didn't always understand what was going on, and you know, Terry and I were reflecting on something recently, and we wrote about this in our first book, or Terry's first book, which I helped her write. And there was a moment where we were just continuing with our story a little bit, but some months later, and Terry might fill in a gap between what I'm saying now, but where we were seeing a psychiatrist who Terry had been seeing. I was with her in the room, and the psychiatrist was droning on about different medications and different options for Terry, and some of them were quite extreme, institutionalization potentially. And then Terry sort of turned around to me, I think said to me on the way home from the psychiatrist, I'm going to go for my medication. And that was quite a dramatic moment, which, big parentheses, but important, we're not necessarily advocating people to do. Each situation's unique and wouldn't necessarily be right for a lot of people. But in her instance, and I didn't agree with that. I didn't understand that decision. I didn't agree with it. But I kind of backed her. I trusted her. And I told her I didn't agree. It wasn't like I just kept quiet. I said, I don't understand this. I don't think that's the right move. It doesn't feel responsible. But Terry had this conviction and strength, even in difficult times, that I could get behind and say, yeah, that we can make that work, or you can make that work if you really feel you can. And that was extraordinary courage it took, and it was remarkable what happened.
Well, maybe I can give some background to that to make more sense of it. So when I came back from hospital, I had this period for 6 weeks, which I really feel was kind of gifted to me as a matana, that I felt very peaceful. I felt this incredible sense of inner peace and almost like a sense of self-love. And my mind was very quiet, and I felt clear. It was like all that mental torture had like quietened down. And I didn't understand why I felt like that. At first I thought it was because, you know, I don't know, like maybe it was like they put me on new meds, but I wasn't on the meds. It wasn't medication. They'd actually stopped my meds for a while to see. And I think what had happened is I was so battling like myself for so long, and just this episode, it almost allowed me to rest for a little bit, and my mind just quietened down, and I touched what I learned later was a deep place of innate well-being, or a deeper part of me that was healthy, that was whole, that was love, that had these deeper feelings intrinsic within it. And why it confused me is that my entire philosophy about life, my outlook, was that in order to feel that kind of peace or sense of okayness, a whole bunch of things in my past, my future, my present had to change. None of those things had changed, yet I felt this deep sense of peace. And I think even subconsciously, this experience gave me the catalyst to kind of move forward and see if I could uncover or discover more of this, what I called invincible summer, from a poem by Albert Camus, who says, in the midst of chaos I found within me an invincible peace, in the midst of tears I found within me an invincible smile, in the midst of winter I found within me an invincible summer. And that made me happy because it meant however hard life pushed at me, there was something within me that was more powerful that could push right back. End of poem. And I felt like I touched into something invincible within me, but I didn't understand. After 6 weeks it started to almost be covered again. But it gave me almost a North Star to kind of interrogate or investigate or go on a journey to see if I could, because I recognized it. I recognized it from being a little girl, a teenager, a young woman. I'd felt this, what I call health interior times. And so that's why I had that moment of saying, let me just, go down this other path and see, give me 6 months and see if I can uncover more of this health in me. Mm-hmm. And so that was what led to that moment of me saying that to Brian.
Wow.
Yeah.
Brian, like during this time and I guess subsequent times when Terry has been struggling, which we'll come to it. Mm-hmm. How did you treat Terry as a wife, or do you end up automatically going to sort of, she's like a patient, or like how do you keep the relationship going sort of in as an equal rather than a carer type mode?
That never occurred to me. That just was never in my frame of thinking or lexicon. We were in a marriage together, in a loving relationship together, husband and wife. And there's been other times in my life where I've struggled, or maybe not in the same way, but other difficulties. We've both experienced a lot of grief and loss in more recent years in our family. There was never that mindset of I'm a carer. I need to maybe step up more and get more helpful and get more pragmatic, but that's about it.
Did you have to step back from the carer at various points?
Yeah. I do want to ask you, did you ever feel that I was in any kind of carer mode? I mean,
no, I think if you had stepped into that, I would have hit you.
Sure. That wouldn't have worked, you see.
I wouldn't have liked that. I was way too fusty for that.
I was smart enough to know that wouldn't work, So,
Because I sometimes tell people, who are let's say spouses that are, dealing with a spouse that is struggling, and every day, and it sort of really weighs people down, and sometimes there's resentment, and they feel that it could be that the other person's pulling them down. And I sometimes say, well, imagine if, let's say, you knew that your wife or your husband or something had a physical condition that they couldn't walk. Would you feel that because you had to do all the shopping, that would you feel that the person's doing it on purpose? And obviously not, because they can't walk. So in the same way, emotionally, in certain ways, people just can't function, or especially with trauma, or incapacitated in certain ways. And I try to help people to sort of almost look at that person, like in this particular area, they just not well.
Maybe I hear what you're saying. For me, I never saw Terry as not well. So there was...
I think, again, probably the difference between what you're talking about and I think what you're saying is very helpful.
Yeah.
Because I think that often when it is something like somebody struggling with something, and I've seen that with clients of mine, people don't make the necessary adjustments because they don't see how big this is, because it's not a physical thing. It's not cancer, God forbid. It's not something like that. So I think the difference in ours was because of what I was so stubbornly functional. So I wasn't, I always said to myself, I wish I could be the person who was depressed and put themselves to bed. I couldn't sleep. I had insomnia. I think that's why it didn't kind of probably shift or need to shift into that for us.
Yeah, I think that's right. And also our dynamic, our relationship was still through it, I think, always strong. So it didn't get distorted. I think there was probably both of us seeing it like that.
I think that when I went through this period I was talking about, when I was trying to, and it was a very difficult period. I had a lot of ups and downs, but during this period, I always say one of the biggest gifts I gave myself was I said, I'm going to fire myself. And what I meant is that, that commentary that you've got in your mind that's always telling yourself about yourself. Well, why am I struggling so much? Because you're an A-type personality. Or why am I? It's always got an answer.
That voice.
Yeah. A lot of self-awareness, right? I'd been for a lot of therapy, so I knew the answers. I decided to fire myself because I said everything that you know about yourself got you to the lowest point in your life. It didn't help you. And, it hasn't helped give you insight. So I wasn't interested in what my mind said.
Yeah.
So it's almost like my mind quietened down and I became interested I almost became an observer. It was like I was a researcher. I was watching people and I suddenly became fascinated.
You started to read.
Started to read ferociously about everyone that had struggled and that they'd, kind of they'd overcome their adversity. I started to watch Brian and think, he does get stressed, but yet it doesn't seem to bother him. But yet my feelings bothered me so much. So I was almost like so intrigued and curious. And obviously we know that a curious mind's a learning mind. It's a mind that's got space for insight. So I started to have a lot of self-insight during this time. And I also started to notice these like moments where I felt better. And generally speaking, as humans, we're always drawn to like the dark corners of the room, the things that aren't so good, right? So if you feel good for 10 minutes, you're going to notice the other 23 hours of the day, right? But I was almost hyper-focused on those moments saying, there it is again. It's so close to me, this like health. And so by the end of the 6 months, I'd had a lot of self-insight and I was a different person. I felt like a different person.
So I think something that then occurred, which I'm preempting a question, if you don't mind, but for the first this occurred approximately, about 10 years into marriage? 10 years into marriage. 10 years into marriage. And for most of that period, Terry and I it felt like I was out in front of Terry. The way I'd had a more diverse life experience. I also had an interesting life. I'd lived in different countries. My parents got divorced when I was 12 and had my own challenges growing up. So came to Yiddishkeit also about the age of 19. And I had this kind of confidence and in my own capability to move forward in life in different areas. And that sort of played out in the first 10 years. And Terry was always kind of trying to catch up a little bit to that. And sometimes that was to our detriment because I'd push it far, like a Purim sort of for 80 people when she wasn't up for it, necessarily, even though she delivered it amazingly, or et cetera, et cetera. And then what happened sort of in this kind of 6-month kind of period that Terry's describing is that the metaphor the image I have in my mind is like I felt, she just went like well past me, she just like took off and accelerated, and it was so obvious
in terms of accelerated, in terms of like personal development.
Yeah. Every psychological health, insight in development. She wasn't faster than me. We did run the marathon together, and I just want to make clear. Well, all right, this could get embarrassing.
Okay,
when you did run the London Marathon, who won?
Officially in those days, Evening Standard used to publish the times in the newspaper, and they put her 1 second ahead of me, which was unacceptable because we also have photographic evidence of us crossing the line at exactly the same moment. So
he always says it's because my nose was longer.
It was a photo finish and she got her nose in front.
That was got Jewish nose.
Yeah, exactly.
Which,
So, but we had. Why don't you mention how it is that I'd always been sporty and into running and still am, etc. And I ended up running the marathon 6 times. But why don't you? How did you get to that? Because you had no interest in that.
So during that period where I was really struggling. One of the things I was also struggling with was I was very sedentary at a time. I was in the house a lot. I didn't want to go out. And I'd put on a lot of weight from the medication and from the babies. And obviously, I still had body issues. Not that I was starving or bulimic, but I still cared about my body at this stage. So Brian decided that he was going to take me to the gym. And I did not want to go to the gym. And he basically almost forced me. He'd put me in the car every single day and he dropped me at the gym. And I really resented him because in my mind, I thought that he felt that I was fat, which I felt I was, right? But I didn't want him to think I was, and I felt that's why he's being so insistent.
It reminds me, someone asked me this Hanukkah, a husband said, can I give my wife a gym membership for a Hanukkah present? Like, no, am I going to get either slapped or how's it going to go down?
Exactly. And but I took myself he took me off to the gym every day. And after a couple of weeks, the endorphins started to come.
And you were running you ran on the treadmill.
I started to run on the treadmill. I remember calling Brian up the first time I ran on the treadmill. It took me 2 weeks. I was so nervous of the moving thing. And I said, Brian, I ran for 5 minutes and I couldn't run. I think there's something wrong with my lungs. And he said, no, you're just unfit. Yeah. But that got me into a love of running. I started to run. I say that so much of my healing happened on the Heath, Hampstead Heath. I spent hours running on the Heath. And that was thanks to Brian really pushing me, and I gave him a hard time.
That's amazing, Brian, because many people would say that one shouldn't go that far. You know, it has to come from the person. But I quite like the fact that you really you knew it was the right thing.
I was proactive in that regard, and I think also and I've always been quite a pragmatic person, so I just kind of knew this would be good for Terry, but it obviously, I supported it and facilitated it, but it had to be out of her own volition, and it was.
That's amazing. You didn't go from couch to 5K, you went from couch to 26 and a half miles.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One thing I'll say about Brian, which is...
An unintended consequence of that was that some of our biggest Shalom problems happened when we were running and training together. So because I have a propensity to articulate my pain.
He's a moaner, and he's a
I was trying to say that in
hypochondriac.
much better language.
Yeah.
Right. So and then Terry would, we would be running races together or long training runs, and I'd be Actually, the most probably emasculating experience I ever had is we went for a 20-mile training run just before the London Marathon. We ran together. We got on top of a very long hill, Fitzjohn's Avenue. We'd run up it. And just before the end, I was done. I was just walking up this hill. And Terry just runs ahead of me, which was bad enough. Gets to the top, turns around, and I'm sort of trying to crawl up this last 100 meters. Come on, what's the matter with you? Hurry up.
Came back down to fetch you.
Look, you introduced her to it.
Yeah. Created that monster.
But it's incredible how you sort of, that in itself, I mean, the way you used exercise as part of your healing process.
What was amazing to me about the running is when you run a certain distance and you think I can never run more, especially when you're going on long training runs. You're on 10Ks, you're on 12, 15, and you think your body feels broken. You feel I can never. And the next time you run further, and it became almost a metaphor for me. I saw how much more freedom of mind I had, how much more potential I had. There was this incredible mind. And so it was very inspiring for me. It was like a metaphor for me as I was running.
There are metaphors. When I go cycling, I never look at at the top of the big hill. I never look at the top of the big hill because I feel like I'm never going to get there. I put my head down. I just literally I say just pedal. Don't look up.
Yes.
And I think that's with life. I always think that's such a metaphor for
very
life.
much. Very much.
Just concentrate day by day.
Yeah.
And then the mountain
micro steps and
there definitely is metaphors.
Yeah. The other thing I just want to say about Brian, which I think was very helpful, and often when people are struggling in couples or in families, is that Brian has this ability to step out of the picture, out of the frame, and see what's needed. Often you're so busy trying to survive that you don't actually put in the practical steps that you need. He has this ability, he had, and I've learned that from him now, to be able to step out of the frame and then see what's needed and then intentionally put those practical things in. I think that was incredibly helpful for us because otherwise you're just going through it and suffering and struggling and in certain patterns.
And trying to survive it.
Trying to survive, yeah.
So who from the two of you was able to step back and to say the community need, or not just the community, or we need some more mental health input with let's go on to sort of the amazing things that the two of you have built and created together.
Thank you. I trained as a psychotherapist, and so that was already my late father was a psychiatrist. There was although I only interestingly got interested in the field of psychotherapy and psychology after he passed, which is an interesting story in itself. But and then I'd taken a job actually working in the city with a team of psychologists in a financial services institution. So I was kind of orientated in that way. But Terry, well, why don't you say what, because really that was much more the catalyst of our community work.
I won't give the details of it, but because of the transformation, I really did have a very deep transformation. I landed up in a deep place of well-being for a long time, where I got a lot of clarity about the human condition, how the mind works. I started to sit at the feet of many amazing psychologists, philosophers, traveled to America a lot. And during that time, I came across somebody who saw that I had a deep understanding of this and said, why don't you start talking about it? I never wanted to be a psychologist. I hadn't had good experiences with therapists when I was younger. So I didn't equate therapy with change. But I knew I'd had a transformation. And as soon as I had the words to articulate, through sitting and learning how the mind worked, how well-being gets covered, how it gets uncovered again, the kind of barriers to it, those started to emerge for me. I found I could articulate it. It just almost flowed out of me. So I started to give seminars, do one-on-ones. I created what's called, at the time, called the Innate Health Center. Got real momentum. I created the first, what was Innate Health Conference, which grew to a conference of 1,000 people. It was just a momentum. And I was loving the work, and people seemed to be getting a lot out of that.
Was it good for you also for you emotionally, because you were helping others, but at the same time, was there also extra stress on you now?
Was it an extra stress?
Because suddenly you've...
No, Yaakov, I know this sounds almost, and it's not that I don't live with, stress and normal human emotions, I do. I'm a normal human.
Quickly chimed in there, Brian.
But the concept of chronic stress or chronic anxiety or big fluctuations of mood or being, all of that went away. I was a different human, and I was a human who now had, for the first time in my life, a sense of self-worth, self-confidence. I could manage a lot more. It was just like a different life.
That's what I meant by Terry, just like accelerated past me. Who is this woman? And how do I catch up to that?
A completely different person than you married.
And I need to start learning from her. Like, it was really powerful for me. And actually, there was a moment where I realized I was in this field, generally speaking, and I realized Terry started to come back and tell me some of the work she was doing with people, whether it was a group, a webinar, one-to-one client, and the impact she was having. And I started to hear from other people in the community, and I realized, and then I started to hear her speak. Now, I'd never heard this woman. She never spoke publicly. Yeah, I'd been giving shirim and felt comfortable to talk in public. And then she would speak at a conference. I mean, I know people, I could see the impact. People would come up afterwards and say, that talk was transformative to me. It made it, I know people have said it changed their lives, things they'd heard from Terry. So I was astonished by that. I got curious about that, and I realized that what she was talking about in teaching and these core ideas of innate well-being, and her curiosity and stimulation to learn further and then deepen that understanding for herself and then for the people she was trying to help and support, got me really excited and inspired. And that actually is what led to me then us working together. That's how come we ended up working together. It was never on my game plan to work with my wife.
It's probably less on mine.
And she's sort of the ultimately the face of whatever you're doing.
That's not so difficult to envisage. I think it's a prettier face. But
I love also your humility.
She shaves more frequently.
Hey, babe.
Are we going to edit that bit? I don't know. We'll find out at the end. No, but I think a lot of men will find that difficult sometimes to... It's not like you're playing second fiddle, because obviously each person is vital to the success that you're both having, but playing that sort of quieter role. Whereas beforehand, as you're saying, the roles were reversed. You were the guy who was going out.
I think I'd be interested to see what Terry says. I mean, I became the CEO of iheart, the founding CEO. Terry founded the organization and was the inspiration behind it. The Havdil, she was the Rosh Yeshiva, but I was the person running it, raising the money, driving the strategy to a large extent. So I think that was probably important for my ego and to feel that I was playing to my strengths. But I didn't have I always felt Terry had, because Terry was authentically living out what she had learnt and understood and been transformative to her, and then the results and the evidence were clear of that, not just for her, but for the people we were working with and helping, just made sense. Like, let's go in that direction.
Yes.
Why would I resist that? On the contrary, I want to get behind that.
I think we were just playing to our strengths. And mine was to create content. We created, when we went and started the iHeart together, the charity.
So what year did you start iHeart?
To end of
2016.
10 years ago, 2016.
2016. So I had decided, I'd been mainly helping adults for the 10 years. And I decided, everyone said, I wish I'd known this when I was younger. So I thought, well, why don't we teach the kids? So I created curricula for kids, for 9 to 12-year-olds, then 12 to 16-year-olds. And then I saw I needed to train people. So
to deliver those
into schools and to train teachers. So while I was going on this journey of creating this and testing it and researching it, Brian was the person who helped get this to scale and go into the world. He was a connector and executor in that way. So I could really just do what I did well, which was either to teach or to train or to create the content. And he did everything that allowed that to actually be a success. So so I think we were just both playing to our strengths.
And like now, like where I mean, you brought out a book also. When did you brought out?
I brought out a book called Exquisite Mind, which was kind of my story, as we've told you. With the only thing is that I often don't like to mention it, because somebody once said this to me when you were writing the book. Be careful about writing a book, because it's now how many years later?
10 years.
It's at least 10 years later. And my philosophy framework that I teach has shifted and changed, but yet the book's there and people read it and they think that's your philosophy. Apparently Brisk have this philosophy that nobody writes a book because of this reason, I totally get it. So we actually are on the version of writing an updated version.
And we had a couple of other books
in between as well. We had a couple
that
Peach thought should be essays and other books, and Brian wrote a book for kids called Escaping the Illusion. But we really do need an updated book, and we're working on that at the moment.
Hopefully coming soon. Watch this.
So what are the plans coming soon?
So I've realized that I'm probably not going to get called up to the Man United squad as a reserve goalkeeper. So despite all my efforts, other plans, right. About a couple of years ago, we created a spin-off out of iHeart, which is a social business called Resilimy, which is a contraction of the words resilient family. So Terry's put most of her attention. iHeart's running itself well now, reasonably well. We've got an excellent schools team and an excellent head of schools. Just one important point to mention, actually, because you said about our work in the community, but iHeart actually as a charity, 80% of its work is in non-Jewish schools. A lot of inner city schools in Ealing and Bromley and different parts of the city and the country. So that's been an interesting journey for us as Orthodox from people, but to create an organization that is, to a large degree, we're now trying, especially since the 7th of October 2024, trying to do more in the community, and that matters to us very deeply, especially because we've seen the wonderful impact of the work, so we want more of our own to receive that. So Resilimy is where we're putting a lot of attention now, particularly Terry, which is building, it's a family membership and service. We've got courses and different trainings, but the essence of it is a platform we've created for families to get regular, ongoing support through the resilience framework that we teach. Do you want to say anything more about those plans?
Well, just to say that I think the thing that I'm most passionate about, as I spoke in the beginning, that didn't change for me, was the family. And I think because of what I learned, I was able to instill a resilience framework and resilience into our family. And thank God our 6 sons, we've still got one who's 14, but most of them are married and older, are very resilient, emotionally healthy.
So it's tried and tested.
Yeah, we had a laboratory inside and in the schools.
No, it's very important.
So we feel passionate about helping parents. We know they can experience that, and parenting's hard and can often feel isolating. You can feel you're working really hard and very lonely. So this is a place where a community can come together, learn together, get content, and hopefully we can share what we've learned, our experience, with others.
Well, it's incredible the energy that you're putting in, and really it all came. I think it's always maybe often cliche, but some out of the darkness comes the light. But you can just see from those darkest times that you had, Terry.
Yeah, so grateful for them.
That everything that you're both doing now in and out of the community is all as a result of those difficult times.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
They call it lived experience, but I think the key thing in life is we all have lived experience by definition. But can you take your lived experience and utilize it to progress you and grow you as a human being? I mean, otherwise what are we doing here on planet Earth? And then can you contribute with that lived experience to share with others?
I'd also say that it's because we went through that, we were able to, when our kids went through any kind of difficult times, if they weren't happy in school or something was going on, we never had the urge to fix and rescue, because we understood what it was. We were supportive for a human being to go through their own internal struggle and uncover a more evolved, a more resilient version of themselves. And, and that's something that, again, is a big part of our philosophy and our work.
Amazing. You we started off the episode saying, how do you help someone and without fixing them?
Yeah.
But maybe that is how you help them, by not fixing them, which you've seen firsthand, by just allowing and accepting.
And I think it goes deeper, because I think you want to try and, what Terry was talking about earlier is touching on seeing a side of herself. In Lashon HaKodesh, we would refer to this as chelek Elokai Mimal. A person has a dimension of themselves, of their soul, of their neshama, that's coming from something beyond from the Rebbeinu Shalom. It's something greater and bigger than ourselves. And I think all our work is orientated towards trying to help people see that in themselves, because that's what Terry saw in herself. There's a passage in the first book where, and we wrote it exactly as it happened, where, if you don't mind me saying this, Terry was, I think you were getting dressed for a simcha, and I came into the room and I said, "Come, we're going to be late. We need to get going." And she was looking in the mirror, and she said, "Don't I look beautiful?" And I just, my mouth just dropped, because I'd never heard Terry utter any words to that. It was always self-critical. It was always, I'm ugly, or some version of that, right? And I just stood there, and she walked past me and said, "Stop standing around. We're going to be late for the wedding." and it was such but what she was saying wasn't about looking beautiful physically. It was about, she saw inside her beauty. She saw inside her chelek Elokai Mibal. She saw that, what we refer to in more psychological terms, that innate well-being.
Yes.
And that is, I think, the essence of what we want to share with people. Turn people towards that, because when you see that in yourself, then everything can be different as a result of that.
Yeah, that is such a precious moment, because it seems insignificant, that it's just an offhand comment, but it shows that Terry's come full. She's gone from someone who was never enough to now, you've arrived. And wow, I think it's a great way to sort of conclude the episode. I mean, we could have spoken for a long more time with a lot more topics, but I mean, in terms of just as a thank you on behalf of the community and everything that you, Brian and Terry, what you do, and please God, what you will carry on doing. I am struck with the fact that through it all, and it just comes out, just the way you talk to each other, is your bond and your connection and your marriage, and which obviously it wasn't done overnight, and that strength has just brought the two of you to really pillars. And when it comes to mental health, you both are pillars in the community.
Yaakov, I'll say one more thing to end, that we have this thing which Brian was always makpid on, that every Thursday is date night. So we're actually going straight from here for date afternoon. We told our kids so that's where we're going for date. And that's something I would recommend to every couple. Outside of your normal, we have fun, we do things we enjoy.
You're not going to go running.
No running today.
Does that count as date night?
I don't think we ever did a running date.
No.
But no, I think, I think it's a very, because you, that you create inside your life, the structure and the system that you attend to each other. And intend towards each other. And the only other thing I'd at the root of this always is bitachon, a deep-rooted belief in your own potential and kaiches, but because that's the way Hashem makes the world, and we're all capable of, and the world is capable because God wants that and creates that possibility and capability and capacity in the world. I think that's something it's easy to lose sight of when even in our own kehillah, we're dealing with our everyday problems. But you've got to see a bigger picture. And that bigger picture is true of us psychologically and emotionally and spiritually, and then, of course, bigger picture in terms of beyond ourselves.
Absolutely. Brian and Terry, thank you so much for joining us. You are, it's often said, but you really are, you are inspiring people. And we wish you much success and bracha along the way.
Often said. Say it again.
First time we've heard it.
Well, thank you for joining me.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Yaakov. Thanks so much.